Everybody knows the name EST, Everybody Shine Together. But in Louisville, that name carries two very different meanings. On one side, it's the brand behind rapper ESTG, one of the city's biggest success stories. On the other, it's the name federal prosecutors use for a Louisville street gang they say ran a large-scale drug and gun operation. In 2021, a federal indictment charged 10 men tied to an organization called Everybody Shines Together with conspiracy to distribute meth, fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine, along with firearms offenses. The case led to major seizures, long prison sentences, and by 2024, all defendants were sentenced in federal court. Here's where it gets complicated. Two of the men indicted were business associates of ESTG, listed with him in filings for Everybody Shine Together Entertainment. That overlap sparked headlines and confusion. But here's the key fact. ESTG himself was never charged, indicted, or named as a defendant in the gang case. Prosecutors focused strictly on criminal conduct tied to drugs and guns, not music. Same name, same city, very different outcomes. Was it branding gone wrong, or proximity to the streets catching up? You decide. Everybody knows the name EST, Everybody Shine Together. But in Louisville, that name carries two very different meanings. On one side, it's the brand behind rapper ESTG, one of the city's big...
And for the first time, the man who seemed untouchable was running out of places to hide. Late 1987, South Jamaica, Queens. The Supreme Team had transformed the Baisley Park houses into one of New York City's most profitable crack distribution hubs. Lookouts watched every entrance. Runners moved product in seconds, and police raids rarely made it past the outer perimeter. But everything changed when the newly formed C-76 Tactical Narcotics Task Force focused its full attention on Kenneth Supreme McGriff and his inner circle. Instead of chasing street dealers, investigators built a conspiracy case aimed directly at the organization's leadership. After months of surveillance, undercover work, and coordinated raids, officers penetrated the gang's security network, seizing crack cocaine, large amounts of cash, and evidence tying the operation to its top command. The arrests shook South Jamaica. McGriff eventually pleaded guilty to reduced possession and conspiracy charges, beginning his first prison sentence. With Supreme behind bars, control of the organization shifted to his 19-year-old nephew. But prison wouldn't end McGriff's influence. It would make him even more dangerous. And for the first, the correctional officer stopped outside the steel cell and looked through the narrow window. "Is your cellmate breathing?" The answer came without hesitation. "No. At this time, he's stinking up the room. Get him out." Inside the cell lay Erasmo Sandoval, dead from strangulation. How does someone end up dead inside one of the most secure federal prisons in America? Federal prosecutors say the man sharing that tiny cell was Carlos David Caro, a Texas syndicate enforcer housed in the Special Housing Unit at USP Lee. During the night, Caro allegedly fashioned a crude garrote and used it to kill Sandoval before waiting calmly for the morning count. When investigators questioned him, Caro admitted causing Sandoval's death, later claiming the attack was sparked by personal insults. A federal jury concluded the evidence proved premeditated murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Caro was convicted of first-degree murder under federal law and sentenced to death under the Federal Death Penalty Act. Even behind locked steel doors, some of the most dangerous battles happen where no one is watching. Before the Italian mafia ruled New York's underworld, one gang in that single phone call signed two brothers' death warrants. By the middle of 1987, the Supreme Team wasn't just controlling corners in Queens. It had become a trusted partner of imprisoned cocaine supplier Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols. From behind bars, Nichols believed brothers Henry and Isaac Bolden had stolen millions of dollars from his drug stash houses. He wanted payback. According to later federal court records, Gerald Prince Miller turned to corrupted parole office contacts to obtain confidential addresses connected to the Bolden family. Those records were allegedly handed to Supreme Team hit squads, transforming government information into a weapon. Henry Bolden was located first in the Bronx. Gunfire erupted, but he survived the attack. Isaac Bolden wasn't as fortunate. Investigators say he was tracked down and fatally shot soon afterward. completing the retaliation Nichols had requested from prison. Years later, federal prosecutors used witness testimony, court records, and evidence gathered during the Supreme Team racketeering investigation to connect the conspiracy to leaked parole information and organized retaliation. But this wasn't the last time corruption inside government offices helped the Supreme Team eliminate its enemies. And that story is even more shocking. In that a college student, August 22nd, 1999, El Paso, Texas. On the Texas-Mexico border, loyalty wasn't just expected, it was enforced with deadly consequences. Federal prosecutors later alleged that longtime Texas syndicate member Jove Rios came under suspicion after money disappeared from a cross-border narcotics shipment linked to suppliers in Juarez. Within the organization, even the suspicion of stealing from the gang's profits could carry the ultimate penalty. According to court records, Rios was lured to a remote desert stash house outside El Paso by fellow syndicate members. There, he was questioned about the missing money. Prosecutors said the interrogation ended with Rios being executed. His body was then buried in a shallow grave in an attempt to erase the evidence. But investigators eventually pieced together the conspiracy through witness testimony and other evidence gathered during a sweeping federal racketeering investigation. The murder became one of the key acts presented in the government's RICO case against Texas syndicate leadership. Jose Luis Rivera was ultimately convicted in federal court and sentenced to life in prison. In the Texas syndicate, investigators argued that betrayal wasn't settled with expulsion. It was meant to disappear forever. And that's when every independent dealer in Jamaica, Queens, realized the rules had changed. By early 1985, Kenneth Supreme McGriff's Supreme Team wasn't just selling cocaine. They were building a monopoly. As crack replaced powder on the streets of Queens, every neighborhood dealer received the same ultimatum: buy from the team or stop doing business. One man refused. Shannon Powell chose to remain independent. According to later federal racketeering filings, Powell ignored demands to fall under the Supreme Team's supply chain and rejected their street tax. That decision carried deadly consequences. Federal investigators later alleged team enforcers tracked Powell through Jamaica, Queens, and carried out a brazen daylight execution designed to send a message far beyond one victim. The objective wasn't personal revenge, it was market control through fear. After Powell's death, resistance reportedly collapsed. Independent dealers either aligned with the Supreme Team or disappeared from the neighborhood's drug trade, further tightening the organization's grip on Southeast Queens. But this was only the beginning, because the violence that followed would eventually bring one of New York's most feared drug empires into federal court. And by the time police realized what was happening, an entire housing project was already under new management. It's 1981 in South Jamaica, Queens. Inside the Baisley Park houses, teenagers weren't just selling drugs. They were building a criminal organization. At the center was Kenneth Supreme McGriff. Alongside Gerald Prince Miller and a trusted circle of lieutenants, they organized the neighborhood with military precision. Lookouts carrying walkie-talkies watched every entrance. Street-level sellers worked assigned locations. Cash moved through trusted runners. Anyone operating without permission was pushed out. Long before crack cocaine flooded New York, the group had already created the infrastructure to dominate its market. When the crack epidemic arrived a few years later, they didn't have to build an empire. They already owned the streets where it would be sold. Early arrests were mostly for street-level narcotics offenses, but they barely slowed the operation. Every day the organization became larger, wealthier, and more disciplined. The Baisley houses became the headquarters of what history would remember as the Supreme Team. And in the next chapter, their expansion would bring unimaginable wealth and a trail of violence that captured national attention. And the moment he stopped paying the dime, his fate was already sealed. In the late 1980s, the Texas Syndicate enforced one rule above all others. Loyalty wasn't optional, and neither were gang taxes. According to court records and contemporary reporting, Mario the Sledge Mendez, a high-ranking street boss in Texas Syndicate, allegedly tried to separate his own drug operation from the organization's mandatory street tax. That decision reportedly earned him a green light, an internal execution order. On March 3, 1988, in San Antonio, Mendez arrived at a neighborhood automotive repair shop expecting another ordinary day. Instead, gunfire erupted at close range. investigators identified Raul El Negro Flores as the alleged gunman. Police arrested Flores, and he was later convicted of murder and sentenced to 99 years in Texas State Prison. Prosecutors argued the killing was a calculated warning. No one, regardless of rank, was above the syndicate's rules. In that world, the street tax wasn't just about money, it was about absolute control. But this wasn't the last time the Texas syndicate proved that breaking its rules could carry the ultimate price. And that's when investigators realized the cartel wasn't hiding money in offshore accounts, it was hiding it on car lots across Memphis. Federal prosecutors say Wayne David McAlpin Jr. and other used car dealers became key pieces in a massive money laundering operation connected to the Petty's drug trafficking organization. According to court records, more than $12 million in cartel cash was allegedly funneled through luxury vehicle purchases. The scheme was simple but effective. Investigators say fake buyer information, fabricated purchase profiles, and fraudulent paperwork were used to make dirty cash appear legitimate. On paper, the transactions looked like normal vehicle sales. Behind the scenes, authorities claimed the money originated from large-scale drug trafficking. As the DEA and federal prosecutors tightened their grip on the Petty's organization, the financial network surrounding it began to collapse. The investigation eventually exposed how businesses that appeared legitimate could allegedly become tools for moving criminal proceeds. McAlpin and others ultimately entered guilty pleas as federal agents unraveled the money trail. But investigators say the car dealerships were only one piece of a much larger empire, and the next discovery would lead directly to the cartel's inner circle.
Some true crime stories.
By the time the guards reached the day room, it was already over. November 12, 1984. Inside the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas, one of the state's most feared prison gangs allegedly sent a message that echoed through every cell block. According to Texas Department of Corrections records and contemporary reporting, tensions over control of the underground prison economy had reached a breaking point. Prosecutors said members of the Texas syndicate cornered inmate Albert Garza inside an isolated day room, leaving him with no way out. Armed with homemade metal shanks, the attackers allegedly stabbed Garza more than 30 times in what investigators described as a deliberate, coordinated assault. Authorities believed the attack wasn't just about one man. It was meant to establish dominance, intimidate rivals, and demonstrate that prison walls didn't stop organized violence. The investigation led to the prosecution of two ranking Texas syndicate enforcers, both ultimately convicted of capital murder and sentenced to consecutive life terms. But for prison officials, the damage had already been done. The killing exposed how deeply prison gangs had embedded themselves inside the Texas correctional system, and why controlling the inside could be just as valuable as controlling the streets. The Texas syndicate's war against informants was only beginning. When John Gotti died in prison, the era of the Teflon Don was supposed to die with him, but one man wasn't ready to let the Gotti name fade away: his brother, Peter One-Eye Gotti. By 2003, Peter had inherited leadership of the powerful Gambino crime family, but he lacked the charisma, influence, and street reputation that made his brother a legend. And there was one betrayal he could never forget: Sammy the Bull Gravano. The former Gambino underboss had helped send John Gotti to prison and became one of the most infamous informants in American history. Federal prosecutors alleged Peter Gotti wanted revenge. According to court testimony, a $100,000 murder plot targeting Gravano was set in motion, but the plan never succeeded. Instead, the investigation unraveled something much bigger: racketeering, extortion, waterfront corruption, and a Gambino leadership already in decline. In 2003, Peter Gotti found himself on trial, not as the next great mafia boss, but as the man presiding over the fall of the Gotti dynasty. The question is, was Peter Gotti chasing power or chasing his brother's shadow? And that's when the counterfeit empire started falling apart. Chicago's Little Village neighborhood, 1993. Along the busy storefronts of 26th Street, federal investigators uncovered what they believed was one of the most sophisticated counterfeit document operations in the region. According to court records and law enforcement reports, members of the Latin Kings allegedly produced high-quality green cards, social security cards, and state identification documents for thousands of undocumented immigrants seeking a new life in America. The operation wasn't just making fake paperwork, it was generating serious money. But the real threat didn't come from the FBI. It came from inside the organization. Authorities alleged that a high-ranking member began secretly diverting profits from the document ring to finance an independent cocaine pipeline. In street organizations, unauthorized side businesses are often viewed as betrayal, and investigators say tensions quickly escalated. What began as a lucrative forgery enterprise reportedly transformed into an internal power struggle fueled by greed, loyalty, and control. As law enforcement tightened its grip, the document operation unraveled, exposing not only a counterfeit network, but also the dangerous fractures within the organization itself. And one decision to keep a little extra money may have changed everything. For decades, Chicago and that's when police realized the bullets weren't coming from the street. They were coming from several stories above. Throughout the early 1990s, Chicago's Cabrini Green homes became one of the city's most dangerous battlegrounds. Rival street gangs fought block by block for control of lucrative drug territory, but Cabrini changed the rules of urban warfare. Its elevated walkways, long sight lines, and towering high-rises became tactical positions. Gunmen could watch entire intersections, spot rivals from hundreds of feet away, and disappear back into the maze of concrete before officers reached them. Residents often found themselves trapped inside their apartments as gunfire echoed between buildings. Children learned which hallways were safer. Families timed trips outside between outbreaks of violence. The bloodshed eventually forced massive police operations, increased security, and community intervention efforts. By the mid-1990s, major enforcement actions and neighborhood changes began reducing the violence, but Cabrini Green had already become one of America's most infamous symbols of urban gang warfare. Because sometimes the deadliest weapon wasn't the gun, it was the building itself. And that when you make enough enemies, and within months, entire blocks were choosing sides in a war nobody could stop. In early 1993, a dispute over one drug corner in Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood ignited one of the most destructive gang conflicts in the city's modern history. For years, the Gangster Disciples and Black Disciples operated under the larger Folk Nation umbrella. While tensions existed, open warfare was rare. But when money, territory, and influence collided on Inglewood's streets, old alliances began to crack. What started as arguments and street confrontations quickly escalated into retaliatory shootings. Crews that once shared the same nation found themselves targeting former allies. Daylight attacks, drive-bys, and block-by-block battles became the new reality. As the violence spread, homicide numbers surged across Chicago's South Side. Entire neighborhoods were forced to adapt as long-standing street boundaries shifted and new rivalries emerged. Many investigators and historians point to 1993 as a turning point, the moment the historic alliance fractured and a new era of conflict began. And the craziest part? It all traces back to a fight over one corner. But that corner wasn't the only thing being fought over. It was power itself. Follow OC Street Files for more organized crime and street history. And with the system thought it.
And investigators still don't know if Lisa Reimer was ever supposed to die. October 4th, 1980. Indianapolis was in the middle of a violent war between rival motorcycle clubs. Tensions were high, retaliation was common, and nobody knew who would be targeted next. That night, 20-year-old Lisa Reimer was riding on the back of a motorcycle along Interstate 465. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She wasn't leading a club. She wasn't known as an underworld figure. Then gunfire erupted. A bullet struck Lisa in the head, killing her instantly. Authorities quickly suspected the shooting wasn't random. Investigators believed the attack may have been connected to the ongoing conflict between the Sons of Silence and the Outlaws. Some even questioned whether Lisa had been the intended target at all. Was she caught in the crossfire of a war she had nothing to do with? Or was someone on that motorcycle the real target? More than 4 decades later, nobody has been convicted, And one of Indianapolis's most infamous biker war killings remains unsolved, because if Lisa wasn't the target, then who was?
For years, suspects entered Chicago's area, to police headquarters believing they were about to face questioning. Some later claimed they were entering something far worse. At the center of the controversy was Chicago Police Commander John Burge, and a group of detectives critics would eventually label the Midnight Crew. Beginning in the 1970s and continuing for decades, more than 100 African-American suspects accused Burge and detectives under his command of using brutal tactics to obtain confessions. The allegations were chilling: plastic bags used to simulate suffocation, electric shocks, severe beatings, mock executions, and psychological intimidation designed to break suspects during interrogation. For years, many of those claims were ignored, dismissed, or buried. But by 1993, the pressure had become impossible to contain. Following mounting investigations, lawsuits, and public outrage, John Burge was fired from the Chicago Police Department. The scandal would eventually become one of the most infamous police corruption cases in American history. The question is, how could something this widespread remain hidden for so long?
Some movie scenes stick in your head because he was inducted into the Latin Kings at just 8 years old, but 20 years later, he became the Fed's most lethal weapon. This is Jesse Guajardo. By 2006, he was a powerful chapter leader in Chicago's southwest suburbs, controlling dozens of soldiers. But when a major drug case threatened him with life in prison, he made a devastating choice. Guajardo flipped. Working undercover with the ATF, he wore a hidden wire directly into high-level meetings with the gang's national leader, the Supreme Inca, Fernando King. He caught the hierarchy on tape, mapping out drive-by escape routes, ordering retaliatory beatings, and even caught the boss accepting a fake kilogram at a local restaurant. His teardown obliterated the gang's Crown Town region, sending over 30 members to prison. Do you think it's fair that people who have committed crimes are able to make deals? Is it just lazy police work? Next time, we'll expose the informant who took down Chicago hobos. Drop a comment below if you want the breakdown on how the feds flipped him. Imagine being charged with murder, facing the death penalty, and the state's entire case relies on witnesses who were paid to point the finger. This was the Pontiac 17. In 1978, a brutal riot at Illinois' maximum security Pontiac prison left 3 guards dead. The state wanted revenge. They indicted 17 Black and Latino inmates for murder, seeking the electric chair. But the defense exposed a dirty secret. The state's star witnesses weren't independent. They were other inmates. To get them to talk, prosecutors offered the ultimate deal: early parole, thousands in cash, and brand new identities with clean social security numbers. It backfired. The bribe testimonies completely crumbled in a Chicago courtroom. Despite the massive political pressure, not a single member of the Pontiac 17 was convicted of murder. These men were protesting inhumane treatment. Do you feel that justified their actions? How do you affect change without action? If we get to 100 likes and shares, we'll do a part 2 detailing the names of the 17 men and cooperating witnesses. That's why a murder that happened in broad daylight took nearly 2 decades to fully catch up with the man prosecutors said ordered it. June 4, 2003. Chicago's West Side. Rudy Cato Rangel Jr., a high-ranking Latin Kings leader with connections to some of the biggest names in Chicago's underworld, walked into a barbershop operating out of a trailer. Moments later, gunfire erupted. Multiple witnesses were nearby when Cato was struck and killed in what authorities would later describe as a carefully planned hit. At first, rumors spread everywhere. Some believed it was tied to a robbery. Others believed it was retaliation. But federal investigators eventually built a different story. According to court records, prosecutors alleged the killing was ordered to strengthen control over lucrative West Side Street operations and send a message about who held power. The investigation stretched for years. Then came federal racketeering charges, targeting members of the Four Corner Hustlers organization. At the center of the case was Labar Broman Spann, a reputed leader prosecutors connected to a long list of violent acts, including Cato's assassination. After a lengthy federal trial, Spann was convicted in 2021 on charges connected to Rangel's murder, closing one of Chicago's most notorious gang-related homicide cases. But nearly 20 years later, one question still lingers. Was Cato's death about money, revenge, or power? Because in Chicago's underworld, Those three things are often the same thing. Some scenes are violent, others are unforgettable because of what happens before the violence. In The Untouchables, Al Capone stands before a room full of loyal lieutenants during an elegant dinner. Everyone is dressed in tuxedos. The food is flowing. The mood feels almost celebratory. Then Capone starts talking about teamwork. Using baseball as a metaphor, he lectures his men about loyalty, unity, and everyone pulling in the same direction. The speech sounds inspiring, almost motivational, and that's what makes the next moment so disturbing. Without warning, Capone grabs a wooden baseball bat and brings it down on one of his own men, again and again. The room falls silent. Nobody moves. Nobody intervenes. In seconds, the dinner transforms into an execution. What makes the scene stick with people isn't just the brutality, it's the message. Capone isn't just punishing a betrayal, he's sending a warning to everyone at that table. The scariest person in the room isn't the man holding the bat. It's every person sitting there pretending they don't see what's happening. That's why this scene still lives in our heads decades later. It shows.
And that's when officials realized the orders weren't coming from the street anymore. When people talk about Maryland's prison system, one name always comes up: the Black Guerrilla Family, often called BGF. Originally formed in California, BGF developed a powerful presence inside Maryland institutions and eventually became the focus of major state and federal investigations. But BGF wasn't the only security threat group inside Maryland facilities. Officials have also identified organizations connected to the Bloods, Crips, Dead Man Incorporated, and various neighborhood-based crews that competed for influence, recruitment, and status behind the walls. One of the biggest scandals erupted in 2013 when federal authorities indicted numerous people connected to alleged corruption and criminal activity linked to incarcerated leaders inside the Baltimore City Detention Center. The case made national headlines and exposed just how much influence some incarcerated figures allegedly held. Because, according to investigators, the prison wasn't controlling them. And by sunrise, an entire neighborhood knew retaliation was coming. The Bronx in the 1990s wasn't controlled by one gang. It was a patchwork of crews fighting block by block, building by building, and sometimes staircase by staircase. As drug money flooded the streets, groups like the Sex Money Murder Bloods, Latin Kings, Nietas, and dozens of smaller neighborhood crews battled over territory, drug spots, and reputation. In neighborhoods like Soundview, Morrisania, Highbridge, and Fordham, alliances could change overnight. What made the Bronx different was that many conflicts weren't between massive national organizations. They often started with personal disputes, robberies, revenge attacks, or neighborhood grudges that spiraled into larger street wars. The scars of those years can still be seen today. Ask longtime Bronx residents, and many remember specific corners, buildings, and parks where entire generations were lost to violence. Because in the Bronx of the 1990s, survival wasn't always about being the toughest person on the block. It was about avoiding the conflict that started the night before. And it didn't start on a New York block. It started behind the walls. Before United Blood Nation became a name whispered across neighborhoods, Rikers Island was the pressure cooker. Young men from the Bronx, Brooklyn, Harlem, Queens, and Jersey were locked together, surrounded by stronger jail politics and looking for protection. That's where the alliance formed. When those men came home, the movement came with them. Soundview in the Bronx became tied to Sex Money Murder. Harlem became linked to 9 Trey. Brooklyn neighborhoods like Brownsville, East New York, Crown Heights, and Bed-Stuy helped spread the name through street crews, housing projects, and corner politics. Queens added its own branches. Jersey helped carry it beyond New York. But the story isn't just about neighborhoods. It's about jail culture spilling into the streets. UBN wasn't built like LA Blood history. It was built in custody, then exported home. And once it hit the blocks, every neighborhood added its own identity. Because the real birthplace wasn't a corner.
Some movie scenes end when the credits roll. This one stays with you.
And that's why a fight in one city could spark problems across the entire valley. When people talk about Texas gang activity, they usually focus on Houston, Dallas, or San Antonio. But down in the Rio Grande Valley, the Tri-Cities of Hidalgo County, Mission, McAllen, and Pharr have their own street politics. These cities sit along one of the busiest border regions in America. Every day, people, goods, and millions of dollars in commerce move through the area. That same location has also made the valley attractive to criminal organizations looking to move narcotics, money, and people across the border. Unlike larger cities where gangs often fight over neighborhoods, valley politics have historically been shaped by family ties, school rivalries, prison affiliations, and connections that stretch across multiple cities. What makes Hidalgo County unique is that the cities are so close together that members often live in one city, go to school in another, and have relatives in a third, which means conflicts rarely stay contained. Because in the Rio Grande Valley, city lines exist on maps. Street politics don't always recognize them. And that's why some investigators say the most dangerous gang member in Harris County might not be the one you see coming. When most people think of gangs in Texas, they think of prison organizations or cartel headlines. But Harris County, home to Houston, has battled gang activity for decades, involving everything from neighborhood crews to nationally connected organizations. Law enforcement estimates that thousands of documented gang members operate throughout the county. Groups linked to the Crips, Bloods, Gangster Disciples, Tango Blast, and other local crews have all appeared in criminal investigations over the years. Authorities say these groups have been connected to drug trafficking, robberies, shootings, fraud schemes, and organized theft rings. What makes Harris County different is its size. With millions of residents and sprawling neighborhoods, gangs often evolve into smaller sets and alliances that can shift quickly. Today's rivals can become tomorrow's business partners if money is involved. And while major arrests make headlines, investigators say removing one leader rarely ends the problem. New recruits and new crews often emerge to fill the vacuum. Because the real battle isn't just against gangs, it's against the conditions that keep creating them. But is that even possible? It started with power, or at least the struggle for it. By the 1980s and 1990s, the Texas Syndicate had become one of the fastest-growing organizations in Texas. Originally formed by Texas-born Hispanic inmates who refused to answer to California groups, the Syndicate built a reputation for discipline, loyalty, and violence. But another force was rising. The Mexicanimi, often called the Texas Mexican Mafia, was expanding its influence inside and on the streets. As both groups competed for territory, recruits, and influence behind bars, tensions exploded into open warfare. Units across Texas saw retaliatory assaults, stabbings, and coordinated attacks. Entire facilities were placed on lockdown as officials tried to separate members before more violence erupted. The conflict wasn't just about politics, it spilled onto the streets through affiliated neighborhood crews and criminal networks. Former inmates and investigators described the feud as one of the most significant conflicts in Texas history, creating enemies that would remain for decades. And even today, stories from former prisoners suggest that old grudges from the Texas Syndicate Mexicanimi War haven't completely disappeared. 35-year-old Eric Butler has been identified as the man killed in an early morning shooting on the city's east side. According to police, officers responded around 2:15 a.m. to reports of gunfire near South Franklin Road. Butler was found suffering from gunshot wounds and later died at the hospital. So far, investigators have not announced a suspect or a motive. Butler's name may sound familiar to some people in Indianapolis. In September 2024, Indiana State Police identified him as a former high-ranking member of the Grundy crew during a major drug raid on the Near East Side. Investigators alleged Butler was involved in drug dealing from a residence on East Washington Street. During the raid, police said multiple people fled and Butler was eventually taken into custody after climbing from an attic window. The Grundy crew was once considered one of Indianapolis's most notorious street organizations, drawing years of attention from local and federal investigators. Butler's alleged connection to that group kept his name in the public eye long after the crew's peak years. Now, Butler's death has become Indianapolis's latest homicide investigation. Was this a random act, a personal dispute, or something connected to a much larger story? Police are still looking for answers. 35-year-old, and that's why one housing project became one of the most feared addresses in America. Nickerson Gardens wasn't built for gangs. It was built in 1954 to give working-class families affordable housing in Watts, Los Angeles. Designed by legendary black architect Paul Williams, it was supposed to be a symbol of opportunity. But by the late 1960s and early 1970s, poverty, unemployment, and a lack of opportunities created a different reality. Young people began forming neighborhood groups for protection and identity. Out of that environment emerged the Green Jackets, a crew that would later become the bounty hunter Watts Bloods, a gang whose influence would spread throughout Nickerson Gardens. As rival gangs grew in nearby housing projects, especially around Jordan Downs, decades of retaliation and territorial disputes turned Watts into a battlefield. The feud between the bounty hunters and Grape Street became one of the longest-running rivalries in Los Angeles history. Today, Nickerson Gardens is still fighting to redefine itself through community programs, intervention workers, and local leaders determined to break the cycle. And that's why some historians believe the rise of the Crips might never have happened if that movement had survived. Long before the Crips and Bloods became household names, Los Angeles looked very different. In the late 1960s, the Black Panther Party was gaining influence across black neighborhoods throughout the city. The Panthers weren't a gang. They organized free breakfast programs, political education classes, and neighborhood patrols. More importantly, they gave young men an identity that didn't revolve around neighborhood rivalries. One of their most influential leaders was Alprentice Bunchy Carter. Before becoming a Panther, Carter had deep roots in LA street culture and carried credibility that many activists lacked. But in 1969, Carter and fellow Panther John Huggins were killed at UCLA. Combined with government pressure, arrests, and internal conflicts, the organization began to weaken. As the movement faded, a vacuum emerged in many neighborhoods. The Black Panthers were a force to be reckoned with. And the unpopular opinion, most people think, how does a white man become one of the most powerful figures in the Mexican mafia? This is the story of Joe Pegleg Morgan, the outsider who rose to the top of one of America's most feared prison organizations. Born Joseph Morgan, he earned the nickname Pegleg after losing part of his leg in an accident. But that injury didn't slow him down. By the 1950s and 1960s, Morgan was deeply involved in organized crime throughout Southern California. While serving time in California prisons, Morgan built relationships with members of the Mexican mafia, also known as La Ime. Despite not being Hispanic, he gained the trust of some of the organization's most influential leaders. Investigators later described Morgan as a key strategist. He helped strengthen communication between prison leaders and associates on the streets, contributing to the growth of criminal operations that extended far beyond prison walls. For decades, his influence was felt throughout California's prison system. His reputation was built not on physical size or intimidation, but on loyalty, connections, and an ability to navigate the politics of organized crime. But power inside a criminal organization rarely lasts forever. In 1993, Morgan was fatally attacked inside a California prison during an internal conflict tied to the same organization that helped make him famous. His story remains one of the most unusual chapters in the history of American prison gangs. What do you think? Was Joe Morgan a criminal mastermind or simply a survivor who understood prison politics better than anyone else? When federal agents started connecting pharmacy burglaries in San Antonio to drug distribution in Dallas-Fort Worth, one name kept appearing in court records: Daniel Ortiz. Prosecutors say the Puro Tango Blast member wasn't just moving drugs. He was part of a conspiracy that stretched across multiple Texas cities. Federal investigators spent months building a case against Daniel Ortiz, a San Antonio man identified in court records as a member of Puro Tango Blast. According to federal prosecutors, Ortiz and two co-defendants burglarized a pharmacy in January 2024, stealing codeine and other controlled substances. Investigators say the group used the Zello push-to-talk app to coordinate before, during, and after the burglary. Authorities later alleged that Ortiz transported the stolen drugs into the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, where they were intended for distribution. Prosecutors also connected him to a methamphetamine trafficking conspiracy and firearms offenses. Instead of treating each offense separately, federal prosecutors used conspiracy charges to tell a larger story: pharmacy burglaries. drug trafficking, communications between co-conspirators, and firearms possession were all pieces of the same investigation. In February 2025, Ortiz pleaded guilty. 7 months later, a federal judge sentenced him to 240 months, 20 years in federal prison. Was Daniel Ortiz a major player in a larger network, or just the one investigators could prove their case against? When one of Indianapolis's most violent conflicts wasn't between famous gangs like the Bloods or Crips. It was fought over a handful of apartment complexes, drug corners, and neighborhood reputations, and the battlefield was only a few blocks wide. On Indianapolis's far east side, the area surrounding 38th Street, 42nd Street, and Post Road became notorious for shootings, retaliation, and street-level drug activity. Residents described hearing gunfire so often that police sirens became background noise. One of the most infamous locations was the Town and Terrace housing complex near 42nd and Post Road. Over the years, the area became associated with gangs, drug dealing, and gun violence so severe that city officials eventually demolished the entire complex. Federal investigators identified one of the area's most violent organizations as the Block Burners, a gang operating around 42nd Street and Post Road. According to the FBI, the group had roughly 90 members involved in drug trafficking, firearms offenses, and violent crime before a major federal takedown in 2015. But authorities say eliminating one crew rarely ends the violence. Smaller neighborhood crews often emerge, fighting over territory, retaliation, and local drug markets. Recent shootings near 38th Street and Post Road show the corridor remains a focus of violence today. The question is, what is driving the beef? Is it all about money or something deeper? Most people think Indianapolis belonged to the outlaws. But in 2011, federal agents uncovered another biker operation, moving serious weight through the city. In August of that year, the FBI's Safe Streets Task Force launched coordinated raids across central Indiana, including the Sons of Silence clubhouse on West Michigan Street. What investigators alleged was surprising. Members of rival motorcycle clubs had allegedly put club politics aside to make money. Federal prosecutors accused Sons of Silence members James Porkchop Taylor and Jackie Little Jack Kraft of working alongside Vigilantes Motorcycle Club member Stephen Davis in a methamphetamine pipeline that stretched from Michigan into Indianapolis. According to court records, the operation distributed high-grade meth across the region before federal agents shut it down. But the drugs weren't the only thing that caught investigators' attention. During the raids, authorities reported recovering an Indianapolis Police Service weapon that had been stolen from a police vehicle. The violence tied to the case went beyond narcotics. In a related federal prosecution, Sons of Silence affiliates were accused of abducting a man over a drug-related debt, holding him captive inside a motorcycle repair garage until he eventually escaped. The result was a major blow to one of Indiana's most significant biker-linked meth investigations. When rival criminal groups cooperate for profit, does that make them more dangerous than when they're at war with each other? What started as a biker gathering in rural Michigan ended with blood on the ground and a line drawn across the Great Lakes that would shape outlaw motorcycle clubs for decades. In 1977, tensions between the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club and the Outlaws Motorcycle Club had been building throughout the Midwest. Both organizations were expanding, recruiting, and fighting for influence over territory, clubs, and criminal opportunities across the Great Lakes region. One of the most infamous confrontations occurred near Clarkston, Michigan, where members and associates from both clubs reportedly came face-to-face in a violent clash. Accounts vary on the exact details, but the confrontation became legendary in biker history because of what followed. After the dust settled, an unofficial territorial understanding emerged. Michigan would largely become a stronghold for the Hells Angels, while the Outlaws maintained dominance in other portions of the Midwest. The conflict helped solidify boundaries that reduced direct large-scale warfare between the two organizations, though tensions never completely disappeared. Nearly 50 years later, the event is still referenced as a pivotal moment in the history of North American biker wars. Was the territorial divide that followed a sign of criminal organizations acting rationally to avoid further bloodshed? Or did it simply allow both groups to become stronger? And when they found the bodies, one of them was still sitting in a chair with his head locked inside a vise. In 1962, two Chicago outfit burglars, James Miraglia and Billy McCarthy, made a mistake that organized crime never forgives. The pair had built reputations as skilled thieves, targeting safes, businesses, and gambling operations throughout Chicago. But according to investigators and mob historians, they crossed a line when they began robbing outfit-connected establishments and allegedly withholding money from powerful mob figures. What happened next became known as the M&M murders. On October 14, 1962, Miraglia and McCarthy disappeared. Days later, their bodies were discovered in a Chicago apartment. Miraglia had been shot multiple times. McCarthy's death was even more shocking. Investigators found evidence that he had been tortured for information before being executed. His head had reportedly been secured in a bench vise, while his killers demanded answers about missing money and stolen property. The murders sent a message throughout Chicago's underworld. Stealing from the outfit wasn't just a crime, it was a death sentence. To this day, many historians consider the M&M murders one of the most infamous mob executions in Chicago history. Were the M&M murders primarily about recovering stolen money, or were they meant to terrorize everyone else and organize crime into obedience? They weren't a mafia family, they weren't a national gang, but for nearly 2 decades, one crew controlled entire blocks of Southwest Washington, D.C., through fear, violence, and a drug empire that prosecutors say left a trail of murders behind it. And at the center of it all was a man named Vincent Vito Hill. Long before federal agents arrived with cameras and wiretaps, Hill was building what investigators later described as the K Street Crew. Operating around the 200 blocks of K and L streets in Southwest D.C., the organization sold marijuana openly and recruited neighborhood kids into the operation. Former associates later testified that some members began working for Hill as lookouts when they were barely teenagers. By the mid-1990s, the crew had become one of the most feared criminal organizations in the city. Rival crews from areas like 58th Street and L Street regularly clashed with Hill's network as Southwest DC became a battlefield. Then the FBI launched a years-long investigation. In 2001, Vincent Hill was convicted on murder, racketeering, and drug trafficking charges. Prosecutors alleged the organization was responsible for numerous killings during its reign. The K Street Crew had controlled the neighborhood through fear. But eventually, fear wasn't enough to stop the federal government. Do these crews create opportunities or just exploit young kids? They weren't, and within minutes, a family restaurant parking lot looked like a war zone.
Couldn't imagine.
On May 17, 2015, hundreds of motorcycle club members gathered at a Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco for what was supposed to be a regional meeting. Instead, it exploded into one of the deadliest biker gang confrontations in American history. Authorities say tensions between the Bandidos Motorcycle Club and the Cossacks Motorcycle Club had been building for months over territory, club patches, and influence across Texas. What started as an argument quickly turned violent. Fists turned into chains. Chains turned into knives. Then gunfire erupted. Police officers who had already been monitoring the gathering immediately responded as bullets flew across the parking lot. When the shooting stopped, 9 people were dead and dozens more were injured. The aftermath shocked the country. Law enforcement arrested 177 people at the scene and initially filed organized crime charges against everyone involved. But years later, many of those cases collapsed due to questions about evidence, identification, and individual responsibility. More than a decade later, the Waco Twin Peaks shootout remains a case study in gang intelligence, mass arrests, and the challenges of prosecuting large criminal conspiracies. Did authorities make the right decision by arresting 177 people at once? Or should charges only have been filed against individuals directly tied to the violence? And within days, prison yards across California were erupting into violence. Stabbings, lockdowns, retaliation attacks, all because one prison war had spread far beyond a single cell block. What became known as the Aryan Brotherhood versus Black Prison Coalition conflict was one of the most violent prison power struggles in California history. Much of the violence centered around institutions like California Institution for Men in Chino, where control of narcotics trafficking gambling operations, and racial influence inside prison walls became a matter of life and death. Federal investigators and prison officials alleged that the Aryan Brotherhood launched coordinated attacks against rival African-American prison groups as both sides fought for influence over lucrative prison economies. What started as targeted assaults quickly expanded into a multi-prison conflict involving affiliates, street gangs, and prison alliances across the state. Lockdowns became routine. Entire housing units were segregated. Investigators tracked orders moving from prison cells to associates on the street. The war highlighted a reality many people never see. Prison gangs aren't just prison gangs. They're organized criminal networks capable of directing violence far beyond prison walls. Should prison gang leaders be placed in permanent isolation if authorities believe they can still order violence from behind bars? And they didn't arrest the gangs. They didn't win a war. They erased the battlefield. For decades, Chicago's Cabrini Green Towers stood over the near North Side like concrete fortresses. Thousands lived there. Gangs controlled hallways, stairwells, and entire buildings. Politicians called it a housing crisis. Residents called it home. Then the city made a decision that changed Chicago forever. Beginning in the mid-1990s, the Chicago Housing Authority started demolishing Cabrini Green's high-rises. The move accelerated under Mayor Richard Daley's Plan for Transformation, a massive effort to tear down public housing towers and replace them with mixed-income developments. By 2011, the last tower was gone. Supporters argued the towers had become impossible to manage. Crime, poverty concentration, and decades of neglect had turned many buildings into symbols of urban failure. High-profile tragedies, including the 1992 killing of 7-year-old Dantrell Davis, intensified pressure for change. Critics saw something different. They argued the city wasn't solving poverty, it was relocating it. Tens of thousands of residents were displaced as public housing across Chicago came down. Many former residents say strong community networks were destroyed while promised replacement housing never fully materialized. Today, luxury apartments, townhomes, and mixed-income developments stand where many of the towers once rose above the skyline. Only a handful of original row houses remain. The towers are gone, but the debate never ended. Did demolishing Cabrini Green help save Chicago neighborhoods, or did it simply move the problem somewhere else? Before drill rap, before social media beefs, before crews went viral on TikTok, New York streets and prisons were being reshaped by a conflict between two of the most influential organizations in the city's history, the Bloods and the Latin Kings. The Latin Kings had already established a powerful presence throughout New York during the 1980s and early 1990s. Their influence stretched from city neighborhoods into Rikers Island and state prisons. But in 1993, everything changed. A group of inmates inside Rikers Island formed what would become the New York Bloods. According to former members and investigators, the organization was created partly for protection against larger, established groups already controlling portions of the jail system. What followed was years of retaliation, recruitment, assaults, and neighborhood conflicts that spread far beyond prison walls. Entire housing projects, school zones, and city blocks became divided by affiliation. Law enforcement launched major gang investigations. Federal indictments followed. Hundreds would eventually be arrested. But here's the question. Were these organizations a symptom of deeper problems already destroying communities? Or did they become the very thing they originally claimed to protect people from? In June 1986, Brooklyn belonged to the Mafia. The Lucchese family controlled rackets across New York. Their reputation was simple. If you crossed them, you disappeared. Then a Russian gangster named Vladimir Reznikov made a mistake. He walked into Brighton Beach's famous Odessa nightclub, pressed a 9mm Beretta against the head of Russian mob boss Marat Balagula, and demanded $600,000 plus a piece of his empire. He also threatened Balagula's family. But Balagula wasn't alone. To protect his massive gasoline tax fraud operation, worth millions every month, he had already aligned himself with the Lucchese crime family. That meant Reznikov hadn't just threatened a Russian gangster. He had insulted the Mafia on its own turf. The next day, Reznikov showed up expecting to collect his money. Instead, he was shot dead in Brooklyn. According to later testimony from Lucchese underboss Anthony Casso, the hit was ordered after Balagula asked for help. The murder solved one problem, but it created another, because Brighton Beach was changing. A new generation of Soviet-born gangsters wasn't interested in paying tribute to the five families. They were building their own power, their own crews, and eventually their own underworld. For decades, the mafia had ruled New York. But in Brighton Beach, the Russians proved something dangerous. The Italians were no longer the only game in town. Did the Russian mob beat the mafia at its own game? Or did organized crime simply evolve into something even harder to control? And most people picture gang leaders as men. But what happens when one of the most important architects of a criminal enterprise is a woman? Fannie Mae Chambers wasn't known for pulling triggers or standing on corners. According to law enforcement accounts and historical reporting, her role was something different. She became a bridge between Chicago's four-corner hustlers and the small Mississippi city of Canton. As the four-corner hustlers expanded beyond Chicago, Chambers allegedly traveled Interstate 55 between Illinois and Mississippi, transporting drugs, money, and organizational knowledge. They thought prison would. Most people picture gang leaders as men. But what happens when one of the most important architects of a criminal enterprise is a woman? Fannie Mae Chambers wasn't known for pulling triggers or standing on corners. According to law enforcement accounts and historical reporting, her role was something different. She became a bridge between Chicago's four-corner hustlers and the small Mississippi city of Canton. As the four-corner hustlers expanded beyond Chicago, Chambers allegedly traveled Interstate 55 between Illinois and Mississippi, transporting drugs, money, and organizational knowledge. But investigators say her most lasting impact wasn't what she carried, it was what she taught. Young people in Canton reportedly learned how to structure drug operations, manage distribution, and operate with a level of discipline that mirrored one of Chicago's most organized street gangs. The result was a criminal network stretching hundreds of miles from its original six-block birthplace on Chicago's west side. Supporters of harsh prosecution argue that people who teach and organize crime can be more dangerous than those who commit it directly. Others argue that many women involved in gangs are themselves products of poverty, coercion, family ties, and survival. Are female gang associates typically leaders, victims, or a combination of both? They thought prison would stop them. According to federal prosecutors, it became their headquarters. In April 2026, the largest gang prosecution in New Mexico history finally came to an end. 178 members and associates charged, 12 leaders sentenced to life. But here's the question. Did the government destroy a gang, or just create a vacancy? Federal prosecutors are calling it a blueprint for dismantling prison gangs. In April 2026, the largest racketeering case in New Mexico history officially came to a close. Over a decade-long investigation, authorities charged 178 members and associates of the Sindicato de Nuevo Mexico, or SNM, a prison gang prosecutors say operated as a criminal enterprise, both behind bars and on the streets. According to court records, investigators linked members to murders, drug trafficking, extortion, witness intimidation, and other violent crimes spanning decades. Federal agents used wiretaps, undercover operations, confidential informants, and massive evidence seizures to build their case. In the end, 12 alleged leaders received life sentences, while dozens of others received lengthy federal prison terms. Prosecutors argue the case proves that long-term RICO investigations can dismantle even the most entrenched criminal organizations. Critics argue that removing leaders doesn't address the conditions that allow prison gangs to recruit and maintain influence in the first place. So here's the question. If a prison gang survives for decades, does locking up its leaders actually solve the problem? Or does it simply create an opportunity for the next generation to take over? Where do you stand? What if I told you one of the most influential rappers of the last decade turned down a reported $22 million record deal and still became a rap legend? That rapper was Young Dolph. Born Adolph Thornton Jr., Young Dolph grew up in South Memphis and built his career independently through his own label, Paper Route Empire. Instead of relying on major record labels, Dolph bet on himself and his team. Dolph wasn't just making music, he was creating opportunities. He helped launch artists like Key Glock and proved independent artists could compete with the biggest names in hip-hop. His albums charted nationally while he maintained ownership and control of his brand. In Memphis, Dolph became known for giving back through turkey drives, donations, and community support. After his death in 2021, the city honored him with a street bearing his name, and lawmakers even proposed a day of service in his memory. Was Young Dolph's biggest legacy his music, his business mindset, or the way he gave back to his community? Where do you stand? What if the FBI just arrested 32 people in a multi-state operation targeting a drug trafficking organization operating in West Virginia and Maryland? Officials called it Operation Turf War. But here's the debate. Do massive gang and drug busts actually reduce crime, or do they simply create vacancies for the next crew to fill? On June 2nd, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies launched Operation Turf War, a coordinated takedown aimed at dismantling a drug trafficking organization operating across West Virginia and Maryland. Authorities announced 32 narcotics and weapons-related federal arrests as part of the operation. The FBI said the investigation involved confidential informants, surveillance, and cooperation between multiple agencies. FBI Director Kash Patel described the operation as a major success and announced it would serve as the kickoff for a broader nationwide initiative called Operation Summer Heat 2.0. Side. Supporters say these operations save lives. Removing traffickers, guns, and organized criminal networks from communities can reduce violence, overdose deaths, and intimidation. Every major organization dismantled means fewer victims. Side B. Critics argue the drug trade behaves like a market. When one organization falls, another often moves in to take its place. They say long-term solutions require addressing addiction, poverty, and demand, not just arrests. What's more effective at reducing drug crime, aggressive enforcement, or addressing the conditions that create demand? Where do you stand? The FBI just arrested. A father finds the man accused of abusing his daughter. Hours later, that man is dead.
What happened? I wasn't trying to use the camera. Okay. All right. Let me turn it back off. So, as we celebrate this 250th birthday of the United States, the reality is that the history of the United States is based on criminal activity, organized crime, and gangs from the very beginning. Whether we're talking about the robber barons, and I think that's something that a lot of people miss in history, is the robber barons. If you're not familiar, then go research it. But there have been times in history when poor white people were treated as poorly as any other race of people. That's the reality. And I always go back to the coal miners' revolution in Virginia, when the United States sent the military there and the police there, and they bashed heads in and killed people, poor white people who were asking for fair wages and health care from working in the coal mines. And so you have those robber barons that have existed that gave people unfair pay, unfair treatment, who got rich, wealthy, off the backs and oppression of other people. And the people, the powers that be, and I try to let me explain something really quickly, and then I'll get back to the videos here. The reality is that, and nobody really wants to hear it and think about the fact that there has been a conspiracy or people conspiring to control the globe, the world. But that is a reality, and it's been happening for a very long time. And what they've done, they've perfected a social order So let me give you a brief history lesson real quick. So initially, what the social order was what was called the ancient order. That's what they call it now. It's the ancient order. And if you go back and you look at those kingdoms of the past, what you'll find is one ruling class or one ruling family or whatever. And then everyone else worked. Everyone else was a slave. You can see this at the Tower of Babel when you had Nimrod, and then everyone worked day and night to build this tower. That was a social order, the ancient order. And then you introduce what's called the feudal order. The feudal order was actually started in Babylon, even though you hear mostly of it existing in Europe. It existed in Babylon when you separate these three classes, where you still have the ruling class, but now you create a middle class and you have the lower class, right? And what happens is that the middle class is supposed to create a buffer between the ruling class and the lower class. Because see, the problem is that if you only have one ruling class and everyone else is slaves, then everyone rises up and they overthrow you and they put someone else in power. So that's what happened. They put somebody else in power, but they said, hey, we want to make it equal. But then they created this three-tier social order, right? And then what they have now today is what is called the new social order of the day is capitalism. And it's a very, very cunning way of making a person a slave by giving them the illusion of freedom. Because what had happened was that those powers, the kings and the ruling class, they took everything. They take the land, right? Let me get back to the thing. Nobody wants to hear me talk.
The FBI just arrested 32 people. A father finds the man accused of abusing his daughter. Hours later, that man is dead. Prosecutors called it murder. Supporters called it justice. Now the charges have been dismissed, and the debate is bigger than ever. Aaron Spencer was charged with second-degree murder after shooting 67-year-old Michael Fosler in 2024. Fosler had been charged with dozens of sexual offenses involving Spencer's teenage daughter and was out on bond at the time. Spencer has always maintained he was protecting his child. Now, in a major twist, a judge has dismissed the murder charge. The court found that law enforcement mishandled critical evidence, including a dash camera memory card that may have captured the incident. The judge ruled the conduct was so serious that dismissal was warranted. If your child is being abused and the justice system fails to stop it, do parents have the right to take matters into their own hands? Side A, a parent's first duty is to protect their child. If authorities fail, many believe a parent has a moral obligation to act. Side B, no matter how horrible the crime, allowing citizens to become judge, jury, and executioner creates a dangerous society where emotions replace due process. What side are you on? A father, a popular YouTuber, just shared one of the most difficult decisions a parent can face. After learning their unborn child had Down syndrome, Jesse Ridgway and his wife chose to terminate the pregnancy. Now, the internet is divided. Some people are expressing sympathy and support. Others believe the decision was morally wrong. And that's where the debate begins. Jesse Ridgway, known online as McJuggernuggets, publicly revealed that prenatal testing showed their unborn child had trisomy 21, also known as Down syndrome. He said the decision was heartbreaking and not made lightly. Question: if prenatal testing reveals a serious disability, should parents have the right to end the pregnancy? One side says absolutely. Parents should have the freedom to make deeply personal medical and family decisions without government or public interference. The other side says no. A disability does not determine a person's worth. and ending a pregnancy based on a diagnosis sends the wrong message about the value of human life. So where do you stand? Is this a matter of personal choice or a matter of moral responsibility? Heart the live, follow the page, and share this debate with someone who sees it differently. A popular, most ruthless cruise in Harlem, New York. A Chicago gang leader is sitting in federal prison. He reaches out to Libya. Federal prosecutors say he offered to commit terrorist attacks inside the United States for millions of dollars. But here's the debate. She was serving customers at work when her ex allegedly walked in.
If a jury finds someone not guilty, 2 prison gangs, 1 state, a war that has lasted for generations. Most people think gang wars happen on street corners, but one of America's deadliest gang conflicts started behind prison walls, and it didn't stop there. The battle between the Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia began in California prisons during the 1960s. What started as disputes over power, money, and influence quickly became a blood feud. The Mexican Mafia, often called La M, built influence among Southern California Hispanic inmates. Nuestra Familia emerged in Northern California, claiming to protect northern inmates from exploitation. Soon, prisons became battlegrounds. According to court records and law enforcement investigations, orders for assaults and murders were allegedly passed through coded messages, visitors, and gang channels. The conflict eventually spilled onto the streets, influencing gangs throughout California and beyond. For decades, authorities have used RICO cases, wiretaps, informants, and gang injunctions in attempts to weaken both organizations. Yet despite thousands of arrests and countless prosecutions, the rivalry remains one of the most influential prison gang conflicts in American history. Who do you think has more power today? 2 prison gangs,